So welcome to Activate Your Impact, Day 2, Silicon Valley's Nonprofit and Policy and Advocacy Summit. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors. So thank you to Kaiser Permanente. Oh, I think we have a slide for this. Great. Okay, Kaiser Permanente, Santa Clara Family Health Plan, the Health Trust, First Five, Stanford Children's Health and Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford Healthcare, the Housing Authority, Healthier Kids Foundation, and Lawani Nguyen. This session that I'm about to introduce is the third of 6 sessions designated to lift up powerful advocacy and policy and to give you the information and tools you need to be a change maker in this pivotal time. I hope you were able to catch yesterday's session. If not, don't worry, we were able to offer a recorded option. And since many of you are rejoining us from yesterday's session, I'll avoid repeating whatever was said yesterday. But if you're not familiar with Silicon Valley Council Nonprofit or SVCN, please check out the links in the chat for more information about our policy alliance, our nonprofit alliance, and how to join as a nonprofit or ally member of SVCN. Now to go over a few logistical notes. We would love for you to share your AYI experience on social media. So the hashtag is AYI21. That's the hashtag, and you can please also tag SVCN. Our speaker today will be fielding Q&A during and after the presentation. So at any time you have a question throughout the presentation, please use the Zoom raise your hand feature or leave it in the chat if you prefer for us to read your question. Either way, we would love to hear from you guys. Otherwise, please remain on mute. If you'd like to read captions or transcript, please click on the Otter AI feature at the top left-hand corner of your screen. And please state your name before speaking for those that are following along with captions. Again, this meeting is being recorded for registrants and members who couldn't make it. So now at this time, I'm honored to introduce to you Lucy Salcido Carter, the Public Policy Director at CalNonprofits. Take it away, Lucy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Josephine, and thank you to SVCN for having me on. And it's great to see folks joining the meeting. So for those of you, we are going to get to some slides in a minute, but for those of you who aren't familiar with CalNonprofits, we are a policy alliance of more than 10,000 organizations in California, nonprofit organizations in California. And we are the voice of the sector statewide. We support policies that protect and promote the nonprofit sector and nonprofits so that we can do the amazing work that we do in our local communities, at the state level, nationwide, and in the world. So that's the basics of what CalNonprofits does. So we can probably go to the first slide. Josephine, thank you for being willing to share those for me so I don't have to think about it too much. And actually we can go to the second slide so you all know who I am. And I'm the Public Policy Director for CalNonprofits. We call it CalNonprofits for short, but it's actually the California Association of Nonprofits. So I wanted to just go over a little bit of what I'm going to talk about today. Because we are a policy alliance that represents the whole sector, the conversation today is going to be focused on policies that affect the whole sector. We aren't going to go into subsectors, so I won't be able to go into bills on housing, for example, or human services. We really focus on those policy issues that impact the sector as a whole. And that's what today's discussion will be. I'll also try to give you a little tidbit of where the bills are in the process. Things are moving very quickly. I was reviewing bills this morning because there have been some amendments to bills already and some referrals to different committees. So things are happening very, very fast. It's still very early in the session. So, and a little bit about what the bills mean to our sector. You know, why these bills? Why are we focused on these and not something else? And then to the extent that they address some of the disparities and inequities that we know exist in our state, I'll cover those issues as well, and give you some tips of where advocacy can happen on some of the bills that we're more involved in. But what I won't do, as I mentioned, is talk about bills that cover specific fields And I won't be completely comprehensive. I am sure there are bills I'm going to miss that you will think really impact the sector, but that either aren't on my radar screen yet. So if you think I've left something out, please put that in the chat or contact me later and let me know. We do try to track all of the bills that affect the sector as a whole. We can move to the next slide. So, I want to start with a bill that's already been signed into law and really reflects a program that was started in January and February and just provides some money for that program. I'm sure many of you have already heard of the California Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant Program. It's a mouthful. This bill is the legislator's version of what was a program that was started by the governor at the start of the year. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we're going to be taking questions throughout, but if you have an urgent question, if I say something and you don't understand it, I'm happy to take questions throughout. We're a robust but not huge group of people, and because we're meeting style, it's really great to have a conversation. So please, if you've got a question as I move forward, feel free to jump in. I know you've been told how to use the raise your hand function, so that's down in the reactions section. But okay, so let's jump in. So this bill, Senate Bill 87, was which the lead author was Senator Caballero, but there were many co-authors on the bill. It became law in late February, and it adds $2.075 billion in relief funds to that small business relief grant program that I mentioned. We were very involved in the advocacy. We were very pleased that the initial program included nonprofits because it is a small business relief program. It has a special carve out for cultural institutions of $50 million. The governor's proposal in his January budget allocated actually $575 million more for this program and only $25 million for the cultural institutions. So you can see how the legislature really made the decision to invest more in small businesses and nonprofits and to invest more in cultural institutions that I think everybody recognizes are really struggling in unique ways during the pandemic. We also fought for and got certain nonprofit specific requirements. The program itself has been very small business focused, and the expertise has been small business expertise. So we've been playing a big part in making sure that what nonprofits need and what nonprofits contribute is part of the conversation. I'll say a little bit more about our advocacy later. Also, the selection priorities, I wanted you to know that they are very focused on trying to balance geographic equity in terms of access to resources and focusing on underserved communities. They've been focusing, because it's a small business program, they've been focusing on who the owner of that small business is, and we've been helping them think about nonprofits and think about who is leading our nonprofits, who's on the staff of nonprofits and the boards of nonprofits, but also who's being served by our organizations. So let's move on to the next slide. So this just gives you a little picture of what we fought for and what we were able to get. And when I say fought, I'm talking about a lot of conversations with legislative staff, with legislators, and with the administration and others. We really wanted to make sure that the application was relevant for nonprofits. The application was very difficult. I don't know how many of you on the phone, I'd be curious to, or on the meeting, I'd be curious to know how many of you have applied for a grant for this program and what it has been like for you as a nonprofit to apply. It would just be helpful to know. We have been hearing a lot from nonprofits. We are a nonprofit application partner. We were the only one with a nonprofit expertise in particular that was involved in this program. And there were just a lot of challenges with the application. So this bill includes additional nonprofit application partners who can help nonprofits apply, which is really great. There is that carve out money that I talked about. We asked for a special carve out for all nonprofits. We thought that 15% of the budget should go to nonprofits because we contribute and generate 15% of the gross state product. So, but that didn't happen, and that's always part of the negotiation process. You win some and you lose some. We were able to get more money for the cultural institutions. We were able to expand their priorities, what they focused on for impacted industries, so that it wasn't, we recognize the importance of some of those industries and the effects that the pandemic has had on small businesses like nail salons and restaurants. But the reality is that certain parts of our sector have also been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So we pushed pretty hard to have some of those subsectors recognized, and they are in fact in the code. So that was a nice victory for us. We also want to know how many nonprofits are applying and how many are getting these grants and what percentage are getting the grants compared to small businesses. So we weren't able to get all of that, but we were able to get a requirement that the Cal OSBA, the Office of Small Business Advocate, will have to report on how many nonprofits are awarded grants. And that report will go to the legislature. And we have a lot of allies in the legislature that are paying attention to how nonprofits are benefiting or not from this program. So that was, we were really pleased to have that happen. And then we had hoped that there would be more in-house expertise in the intermediary that's running the program. And they've been very receptive to our expertise around what nonprofits need in a grant program like this. And so what is in the legislation is that there must be nonprofit outreach expertise, and that there must be an effort to make sure that the distribution of the grants is fair for nonprofits and small businesses. So those are just some of the accomplishments. I just want you to know that, advocacy really can make a difference. I know you all know from your own experiences doing this, but we jumped in right at the beginning of the session and have been very active in doing this. So let's go to the next slide. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a picture of what we did in our advocacy. Before this program even started, we worked with the administration. We sent a set of principles to the director of the California Office of Small Business Advocate with recommendations of what we thought this grant program needed to look like for nonprofits. In particular, we knew that she had in-house expertise for small businesses, but we also knew that they needed us to let them know about nonprofits. We have great allies in our state legislature. And I have to say, a lot of them, we have worked with as a state association, but also they have strong relationships with organizations like yours at the district level, and they're hearing from their nonprofits about what they need. So they were ready and willing to say, we've got to make sure that nonprofits have a fair shake at getting these grants. We were very engaged in the budget process. I don't know how many of you have been involved in advocacy in the budget process. It's tricky. It's a little less transparent than the straight legislative process. But we participated in, I think it was 7 budget hearings. And this was a rushed bill, signed and sealed already. So that it was a very intense process. And we were part of a coalition of nonprofits that were engaged in this advocacy. And then just the other thing I wanted to point out, so you all know, there's another bill out there, Senate Bill 74, that is authored by Senator Borges. This bill is probably not going to move forward, but the conversations we had about that bill were really pivotal in shaping Senate Bill 87. So just an advocacy tip that you may work on one bill and that bill may not go anywhere, but a lot of times that work still informs the advocacy going forward. So that bill very explicitly acknowledges the contributions that nonprofits make to our services supply chain and to our economy right off the bat, and the impact that the pandemic had. So some of that preliminary work, even though this bill isn't going to go forward, it kind of just got woven into what ended up being Senate Bill 87. So we can move to the next slide, and I'd be curious to know if there are any questions, or Josephine, if you've got any, or if other folks want to ask about this this particular bill?
Yeah, we have a question in the chat from Maggie Conroy. If we received money from EIDL in 2020, can we apply for this as well?
Absolutely. So the federal grant programs and these state programs, you can apply to both. So they will ask a question in the application about whether you received either a Paycheck Protection Program forgivable loan or an EIDL. Let's see, what does that stand for? Emergency injury disaster loan, something like that. I used to know, I'm sure you all know, but either way, you can apply for this, one of these state grants. I really encourage you to. In fact, we're going to have a webinar on Friday, and I will make sure that Josephine, you have the information about that webinar. There's not an open round right now, but starting next week, there is going to be an open round for nonprofit cultural institutions to apply. And then there will be a 5th round and a 6th round that will be open to all nonprofits. So happy to provide more information about that.
Great,
Any
that's good.
other questions about this one? We've got a lot more bills to cover, but this is just such an important one, because it's really reflects years of advocacy around our sector and making sure that our sector is considered in some of these other relief programs. It's just so important. Anything else, Josephine, before we jump along?
Yeah, I have a pre-written question I'd like to ask.
Okay.
So what do you think the why do you think the legislature increased the relief amount from what it was in the governor's January proposed budget?
Okay. Well, I mean, this really points back to the importance of local advocacy, frankly. Legislators were hearing from people like us at the district level that they were really struggling, and they were hearing from small businesses, and they were hearing from nonprofits. They were hearing that we need help. I mean, we're really, really struggling, and we need help. And we know with the nonprofit sector that the impact of the virus and the economic recession has really varied a lot in our sector. But still, people have been hearing that, you know, for some nonprofits, that means we have more services we have to provide, but we don't have more resource. We have PPE costs, but we don't have more resource. Or we've been closed. We're a museum and we haven't been able to open. So, and everything in between. So I guess, you know, it points back to just how important it is for us to have a relationship with our local state legislators as well as other local elected officials, and to be telling them about what we contribute, but also where we struggle. So I really think that is why that they were hearing stories from their constituents, and they brought those stories to this the discussion, and they really didn't feel that 575 million was enough to address the need. It looks like we might have a question in the chat, but Josephine, do you have another question for me? Or let's see.
No, I'll go to the chat question. For SB 87, it was mentioned that there will be an auditing process to a certain data on who gets funding from the bill. Do you know if the data will be considered consider Black-led organizations or minority-oriented organizations?
Yes, the data so far has focused on that. Now, as I mentioned before, they call it who the owner is, and we've really been working with them to think about nonprofits, because we don't have owners with nonprofits, but they have been including data on whether the recipient organization or business serves underserved communities, and also whether the leadership reflects an underserved community. So that they are doing that. I don't know if they're doing it actually by ethnicity or race, or if they're just saying, they may be saying minority ownership, which is kind of a generic term and not ideal, but they are doing that. So I don't know that they're necessarily breaking it down. They're also looking at women-led or women-owned, if it's a small business organizations. So yes, that happened in the first 2 rounds, and that data actually is available in some of the hearing materials, the budget hearing materials. I can point people in the direction of that. And then they do have an obligation to do that going forward, Zachary. So you'll be able to take a look at that and see how they're addressing equity issues. And they have a goal in this program to address equity issues. I know it's a real priority for Lendistry, the intermediary organization, and for Cal OSBA, the state agency overseeing it, and for us. Any other questions, Josephine?
No, I think that's all for now.
Okay, let's move on and dig in. But please, make sure you research that grant program and apply. We want as many nonprofits applying as possible. So there have been a lot of other emergency response COVID-19 bills, and I want to make sure that we get to as many of them as possible. As you all know, last year, they really only considered bills that touched on the pandemic in some way, and a lot of bills went the wayside and have been reintroduced this year. We're hoping we'll have a full legislative session this year. It was pretty truncated last year. So I want to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 784. This is Senator Glazer is the author of this bill. This bill comes out of the fact that the pandemic highlighted a problem that pre-existed the pandemic, and that is that nonprofits have a lot of contracts with government agencies, state, local, federal. And when a crisis does hit, we need to be able to have the flexibility to respond to the crisis with changes to services as needed. I mean, we saw this happen where services had to shift from in-person to online. And some agencies have been very flexible and very adaptive, and other agencies have not. And it's been very difficult. It's been really hard for nonprofits, so you all know this, to buy PPE, for example, if it's not in your contract budget. So this bill will provide that during emergencies, it is okay for nonprofits to change their practices as long as the purpose of the contract is met. So you can adapt practices during an emergency. Agencies have to continue to pay the nonprofits, and there's some formulas for how they can pay in the bill. I didn't put this on the slide, but if they're a fee-for-service organization, for example, they could just pay on a 1/12 of the total contract amount per month. And do it that way to ensure that agencies are getting paid. So this bill is really designed to address the fact that we as nonprofits need to have the flexibility to implement services that are really going to help our communities, but we need the flexibility to do it in the best way, given the fact that there's an emergency. So we're really pleased that Senator Glazer is taking this bill on. I also wanted to say we did a survey. Some of you may have participated in this survey last spring, where we actually asked you all, what has your experience been around your contract relationships with agencies, state, local, federal? And we really heard that people were needing very much to change their contracts, performance on the contract, so that they could do what they really needed to do to serve their communities. So we're happy that we've got data to back up this bill. We're not sponsoring this bill. It's a legislator-sponsored bill. Some legislators prefer to be their own sponsors on the bill. They don't have an organization sponsor it, but we're strongly in support and serving as advisors on this bill. So let's keep going. So I want to talk about another emergency response bill. This one actually will not be focused in particular on when there is an emergency, but the issue really came to the fore as a result of the pandemic. This is Senate Bill 543. It's Senator Limon. And this one will provide that every state agency that does business or regulates nonprofits will have a designated person who will serve as a nonprofit liaison. part of what we've seen that's really been highlighted during the pandemic is that government nonprofit relationships are vitally important to ensure that people get the services they need, but that there are challenges with those partnerships. I'm sure many of you could talk about what they are, and that sometimes every agency behaves differently. And so if you have contracts or need to comply with agency requirements across a spectrum of agencies, it gets very difficult. There is comparable legislation already, law now, providing for small business liaisons. And we thought that really, if this is a priority for small businesses, then it really needs to be a priority for nonprofits too. So many of us have contracts and work closely with state agencies. So the liaison will help with compliance to make sure that we've got a person we can work with to make sure we're following whatever that agency's regs are, to address concerns we have, and to take those concerns up to agency leadership so that leadership is aware of what they are, and also to develop better contract practices as needed. So, and we are sponsoring this bill. We brought it to Senator Limon. And just to give you an update, I didn't give you an update on Senate Bill 784. That one has been referred to committee. It has, it has been referred to the Senate Committee on Governmental Organizations. So it hasn't been heard in the policy committees. As I'm sure you know, these bills first go to policy committee and then to fiscal committee and then have floor votes. So we're at the policy committee stage right now. And I'm happy to report that this bill, Senate Bill 543, was passed unanimously in the Senate Committee on Governmental Organization yesterday. And our CEO and one of our board members testified. So let's keep going. There's a lot.
Before we move on, there is a question in the chat.
Please.
So I'm going to go back to the last bill. Would 784 be inclusive of behavioral health and Medi-Cal?
Absolutely. So yes, this is comprehensive across the nonprofit sectors. It touches on all of them. Any questions about 543 or before we move on?
I think you answered all my questions about 543.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, good. Well, let's keep going. So here's an Assembly member ComLogger bill 118. This is a bill that carried over from last year. And the underlying purpose of this bill is to bring more community-based organizations like ours into the mix to respond to crises. And they define crises quite broadly to include natural disasters, things like the pandemic, but also to include mental health crises, intimate partner abuse and domestic violence, community violence, substance abuse issues, as well as natural disasters. And the point of this bill is to have money for grants to community-based organizations to provide interventions when emergency response from police and fire departments is not needed, when other kinds of responses would actually be better. So, and part of the motivation for this is to reduce the intervention by formal public systems when you don't need to have formal public system interventions. We all know that there are ways in which on the ground community-based services can help in these situations in ways that public systems can't. So last year there was no money allocated for this, so this will be really important. It will only be enacted if there's actually money in the budget for it. Great, let's keep going. I'm conscious of the time. We've got a lot to cover. So I wanted to just touch on these bills a little bit, because nonprofits are commercial tenants. What happens around relief for tenants is important for us. And we're also serving people who are experiencing struggles in paying their rent or meeting mortgage payments. So there was a bill passed last year, AB 3088, that put limits on the ability of landlords to evict when tenants were struggling to pay rent. And this was focused primarily on residential. So AB 16, this new bill, will essentially extend the mortgage and rent relief that was in those previous bills. And it will extend it, as you can see, through September 30th. So that will have an impact on many of the people we serve, a positive impact. I also wanted to touch base on AB 255, because there was a bill last year that focused on commercial property tenants, and many of us as nonprofits are commercial property tenants. And some of us are struggling to meet our commercial property rents. This bill right now, it's the Murat-Suchi bill, only focuses on small businesses. So we know that we have got a mission here to make sure that nonprofits are added. And I think in every conversation we have had where some of these relief bills just focus on small businesses, there's always been great receptivity to including nonprofits. People just aren't necessarily thinking about us as commercial property tenants, but when we point out that we often are and that we may be struggling to meet our rents, then they very quickly add this. So we will be working with Murat-Suchi's staff to find out more about what they're thinking about this bill. It's still an intent bill. So just to explain what an intent bill is, it's just very basic language that states what they want to accomplish in the bill, but it doesn't get into the particulars. So we have a lot of time to make sure that when they take amendments to the bill, nonprofits get added to this. And if we engage with the staff, we may also be able to influence what the particulars are of the bill to make sure that it does really help us as commercial property tenants. And these bills have, let's see, the Murat-Suchi bill has not been referred to a policy committee yet. The Chu bill has been referred to Housing and the Community Development Committee. So that one will be heard in policy committee pretty soon. So I also just wanted to point out that even though we're focused really on state bills in this conversation, last year the governor issued quite a few executive orders, and he has this year issued this executive order that also has an impact on commercial property tenants. And it essentially extends the protections that were in place last year. And just to remind you all what those protections were, they were really giving local governments the permission to enact their own ordinances around eviction moratoriums. So at the county level, I know a lot of counties and cities have done this to enact their own ordinances to make sure that people aren't evicted from their residences, but also to make sure that organizations are not evicted from commercial properties. So this just extends the deadline through June. And again, it points to the need for local advocacy. You know, this is one where the state has basically given the legal permission for local governments to pass these ordinances, but it's up to the local governments to do so. Okay, and I just wanted to say a word about the school reopening bill. I mean, this isn't directly related to us as nonprofits, and yet has such a huge impact on people we serve, and also us sometimes as parents. I know it can be very, very challenging. So the governor passed or recommended a program called Safe Schools for All. He came up with a plan. This is the legislative version of that plan, AB 86 and SB 86. AB 86 was actually approved by the governor on March 5th, so very, very recently became law. It allocates $6.6 billion to support schools. $2 billion of that is incentivized to encourage school systems to reopen, starting with the younger age groups. And I won't go into a lot of details about these bills, but I really just wanted you to know that they have happened. I know you've been hearing things about school reopenings and probably hearing about the governor's plan. These bills are the legislative manifestation of that plan. It also requires that 10% of vaccines be set aside for teachers and school staff. So I know there's a lot of issues, with unions and a lot of challenges with when reopenings should happen and how they should happen. And we won't get into that depth here, but I just wanted you to know that this is also part of the legislative process that's happening this year. So any questions about any of these bills that we've touched on so far?
I don't see any in the chat,
Okay.
but I did want to go back to I think it was called the Crisis Act. Oh, I think I went too far.
Okay, the Comlugger bill.
Yeah, I was wondering what led to the Crisis Act, and was it a lot of public advocacy, or what led to that one?
Yes, the justice reform nonprofits have been very involved. There it is, very involved. It's really part of the defunding law enforcement. Maybe is part of that movement, but really, I would say it's broader than that movement. It's also, but it's being led by a lot of justice reform advocacy organizations who would like to see interventions happen at the local level and be more connected to the communities that are affected by some of these challenges, and to be served and developed and implemented by the communities for the communities. So that's really the impetus behind it. Policy Link, based in the East Bay, was one of the lead organizations on this bill last year. So I would imagine that they are also one of the lead organizations in it this year.
Great. And then you spoke a little bit about this already, but how will you go about getting nonprofits added to AB 55, 255?
Oh, really, we use our causes count data a lot. People just, we're invisible in plain sight. Our CEO says we often are, and it really helps to use data. So we will say things like, did you know that nonprofits are the fourth largest employer by industry statewide? Do you know that we provide 32% of Medi-Cal services statewide? Do you know that we are so critical to the gross state product and contribute 15%? So really using those kinds of data points to remind people how important it is, and then to tell stories. We don't have a lot of data, and I wish we had more on the impact of the pandemic on the sector statewide, but we have plenty of anecdotal evidence, and I'm sure you all could provide it as well, about the struggles that nonprofits are facing. And so we talk about that, and it really isn't that hard. I think I mentioned before, that it's really just an oversight that they are so excited to correct once we bring it to their attention.
Okay, great. That's the only questions that I had, but I see that there's a question in the chat about the SB 87 workshop.
Okay.
Could you clarify what that one is for? And then Maggie, if you want to speak on your question, go ahead.
Okay, Maggie, yeah, I got your question. I'm looking at it right now and I understand it completely. So let me explain. There are going to be 3 webinars for nonprofits that I know of so far for this grant program. The one we're doing this Friday is for all nonprofits, and we are going over what is going to be happening with the grant program now through the end of round 6. So we're going to talk about the current round, which is round 3. We'll talk a little bit about round 4, which is the cultural institutions one, and then we'll talk about the 2 open rounds that are happening, rounds 5 and 6. So, and we're going to do that with Lendistry. It's not going to be me, it's going to be our CalNonprofits lead on the grant program, which is Sue Sigler. And she's fantastic. She really understands the ins and outs of this program and can help you a lot. We have some FAQs also on our website. for this program, and the information about the webinar. So that one is happening this Friday. On Monday, there is one just for the cultural institutions round. That's the one, Maggie, that you must know about. That one is being led by Californians for the Arts and the California Association for Museums. And Sue will be on that one from CalNonprofits and will be one of the speakers, but we are not the lead on that one. And then we are doing another one, I believe on the 24th of March, where we're going to dig into what the round 5 application looks like so that people can track with that. These aren't the most user-friendly applications for nonprofits in particular. I've mentioned some of the examples of why they aren't. So being able to look at the application process in more detail can be really helpful. So I hope that answers your questions. Please go to calnonprofits.org. And I know we've got probably on our homepage all of that information about those webinars and how to get support for that grant program. Great. Should we keep going?
Yeah, let's keep it moving.
Okay, good. Thank you for your questions. This is great. Yeah, and happy to help. So, okay, so a healthy democracy is going to lead to a healthy nonprofit sector and vice versa. So, we as nonprofits care about the democratic process. We want to make sure our communities are represented by our elected officials. We want to make sure that people have equal access to the election process. And so we've been tracking and will support some of the bills that increase access to elections. Actually, we will support all the bills that increase access to elections. There are some that make some changes to elections that we don't necessarily think the data support. But one of those bills has already become law, and that is Senate Bill 29, the Umberg bill. That provides that the vote by mail option that we experienced last year with the ability to track our ballots will continue this year. And that was passed rush because there'll be some emergency elections coming up this year, and wanted to make sure that with the pandemic continuing that those options are still available to us. Then Assembly Bill 37, the Berman bill, that one essentially does what Senate Bill 29 does, but it provides for vote by mail option and ballot tracking going forward, period. So for all elections. And then we also have Assembly Bill 53, and this is Assembly Member Lowe, a local assembly member for you all. And he would like to make Election Day a holiday every other year, alternating with Washington Day. So the even years would be an Election Day holiday on Election Day. The odd years would be a holiday on Washington Day. And I want to say about that last bill that at least the data that we have seen, it doesn't necessarily, it can be a challenge for working parents, and particularly for single parents and single mothers to have an Election Day holiday. And we're not sure that the data points out that having Election Day be a holiday actually will increase access. So we'd love to, if you have data or information that shows that this would increase access, we'd love to know more about that. So those are some access to the democratic process bills that are really focused particularly on elections. Let's go to the next set. So there's also a bill that will implement some improvements to the state legislative democratic process, which is also something we want to make sure that we and the people we serve have access to. Right now, I see that Petra's really excited about AB 339. That's great, Petra. So right now, we do have phone access to all legislative hearings. There's a special line if you're testifying as a key witness. And if you are just making public comment, there's also a line that you call into, and you're just in listen mode until your number comes up, and then you're able to do public comments. This will make sure that these measures are in place as law, and that call-in is an option. I mean, I know that equity issues are really important, and not everybody has online access. We can't all watch these hearings on our computers and live stream them. So it's really important to make sure that there is a phone option. And so this would make sure that that becomes law. It also would require translation in the 10 most spoken languages other than English. Right now, you can testify in any language you want, but unless you have your own translator, the only people who will understand what you're saying are the people who speak that other language. I have seen, I want to say, one legislator, it was Assemblymember Carrillo, did her own translation from Spanish to English in one of her budget subcommittee hearings. It was really quite impressive that she was leading this hearing and also doing live translation. That's a difficult thing to do. But it isn't universally available. So this bill would make translation services universally available in the 10 most spoken languages for the purposes of testifying and engaging in our state legislative process, which is vital. Let's keep going. Oh, and I wanted, let's see, this bill, that AB 339 has not been referred to policy committee yet. And some of those other election bills, AB 37 has been referred to the, I believe there is an election committee. Yes, the Committee on Elections, the Assembly Committee on Elections. So just so you know where those bills are. Okay, so, and I also wanted to touch on, oh yeah.
Can I jump in for a second about that
last Please, Petra, yeah.
Sorry, dog is very excited. The thing that I'm most excited about is that during COVID, we were allowed to do remote public comment, and this bill will allow for a continuation of remote public comment. And that
yes, that's a really
power as nonprofits. So that's why I'm excited about the bill.
Yes, that is such a great point. And I wanted to make it, I mean, not everybody can get to Sacramento. So even once the pandemic ends and we're doing things remotely, to be able to have a call-in option like this is really, really important. Thank you, Petra.
And I think it applies to local as well.
Okay. So, yeah. I thought it was a state focus, but we should go back and take a look. This is one that we haven't been as directly involved in. We've just been watching it, but it sounds like you've been pretty intimately tracking it. So it's great. Okay, good. Let's keep going. So I wanted to touch on these broadband access bills. I mean, we all know that broadband access has really come to the fore during the pandemic, and legislators are aware of it as well and want to make sure that we are addressing the disparities around access to broadband. And so the first bill, the Muratsuchi bill, AB 34, is just an intent bill. Oh, good, Petra, you're putting more language in about AB 339. Thank you. And this is a Assemblymember Lee bill, by the way. I wanted to point that out. That's important since you all are in Santa Clara County. So, and I know Petra, you're not, but others are. So, yes, so the first one, the Muratsuchi bill, is just an intent bill right now. We would need to we would need to have an election to issue state bonds. So voters would have to support this in order for it to become implemented. But it would be really funds to increase access in rural communities, urban communities, and underserved and unserved communities, including tribal communities. So right now that is just intent language. So again, you know, we don't know the particulars of that. The Senate Bill 28, the Caballero bill, there is more language on that one. And that one is to require the Department of Technology to compile and post a list of state resources that would support increasing broadband access. And there's been a recent amendment to this bill that also really holds some of the franchise companies, the ones who provide access, holds their feet to the fire a bit more around making sure that they do not discriminate against certain communities that aren't as that are lower income, and that if they aren't going to serve those communities, that the state will support prioritizing other servers to provide those services. So I encourage you to take a look at that bill. It has been double referred to Energy, Utilities, and Communications, and to the Senate Governmental Organization. So a lot of policy committee review on that one. So, and I think it's interesting that they've added that language that prohibits franchise holders from discriminating against communities that are lower income. Okay. So any questions about this collection of bills? I want to make sure we get to the other ones too, but I do want to take any questions you have. Oh, good. Thanks, Petra, for putting that language in.
I'm not seeing any questions, so we can move on.
Let's keep going. So one of the things that's really important is access to private funding. And so there are a couple of bills that we are supporting that protect access to private funding. The first one is AB 488, and that's Assemblymember Irwin. Last year, there was this bill made it fairly far, and then I can't remember what committee it didn't move forward, and it might have been appropriations. So this really reflects the work that happened last year with a lot of the PayPal, Facebook, Amazon Smile organizations of the world that have online charitable platforms, GoFundMe, Network for Good. Right now, they are really underregulated. The law has not caught up with the way we fundraise and the move of so much fundraising to online. So this regulates those platforms, requires them to register with the AG's office, requires them to submit annual reports on their assets and distributions of donations. It also supports making sure that any fees that are attached to donations are disclosed and disclosed before the donor hits the donation button. I mean, one of the reasons why we really are supporting this bill is because we think that the donor charity relationship is so important, just to make sure that nonprofits have the support they need. So we want to make sure that donors are protected and know where their money's going. We also want to make sure that the recipient charities are protected. This is one that the AG's office itself is sponsoring, and we're supporting it. And there's been a lot of great stakeholder conversation about shaping it in a way that will stay good for donors, stay good for nonprofits, but also give the platforms, some of the flexibility that they need to be innovative and do what they want to do as well. So there's some big players in these conversations, I have to say. And then the other bill is just a spot bill. It's very, very basic language, touching on the need for transparency around donor advised funds. And I know that this is a very controversial topic. And part of the reasons why it's a spot bill is just to kind of see what happens at the federal level around these issues and where there are opportunities to increase transparency so that we have a better sense of where donor advised funds are going and how quickly they're moving to the community, what percentage of funds are going to the community, et cetera. So, and by a spot bill, it just means that, it's probably going to stay a spot bill. And then at some point, some more substantive language will be added to it. Let's keep going. Okay, and I know you all know about Assembly Bill 5. There was Prop 22, which was related to AB 5. And there are a couple of additional carve-out bills. Last year, there was one for musicians and others. And really, those carve-out bills just lower the standard for the threshold for figuring out whether a worker is an independent contractor or an employee. And these are both arts related. One is AB 1227, and the other one is Senate Bill 805. I know Californians for the Arts is one of the supporting organizations for that Senate bill. So again, it's striking that balance between making sure that workers are protected, but also taking into account the fact and the reality that nonprofits, especially small arts nonprofits, really struggle with implementing AB 5. So let's keep going if we can, unless there are questions. Okay, and then I also wanted to touch on a couple of student loan bills. Well, actually one bill and one resolution. And why is because we know that a lot of nonprofit staff have significant student loans, and it makes it difficult to hire and keep a diverse nonprofit workforce. So Assemblymember Stone was the key author on a very important bill that was signed into law last year, providing protections for student loan borrowers. This one focuses on private lenders and also private collection agencies, and kind of make sure that they aren't misusing the court process, but that they have all their documents in a row and have taken the steps that they should be taking before they use the court process to put pressure essentially on student loan borrowers. And then the second one is a state resolution urging the president to cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt for each borrower. So there's been a big movement nationwide around student debt cancellation. So this is basically supporting that movement. And I think leaders will send a letter to the president. And resolutions are not law, so they're not enforceable. It's more expressing an opinion. So, and I think I've raised some of these, but we do have some publications on our website about why student loan debt is an important issue for nonprofits to pay attention to, and for nonprofit employers to be aware of and to be supportive for their employees that have significant student loans. We can keep going. And then I wanted to just raise this last bill, and because it's, even though it pertains specifically to museums, it relates to the fact that, nonprofits we have exemptions around paying property taxes, but museums, when they rent out space to community organizations or groups, have to pay property taxes on just the portion of the space that they have rented out. And it's up to the counties whether they want to require these payment on these property taxes. So it really varies a lot from location to location. So there's not statewide equity around it. So this bill, which was actually appeared last year and then didn't move because it wasn't quite pandemic focused enough, has reappeared as a Senator Skinner bill, and will make sure that those spaces are not being taxed through property taxes, so that museums can continue to make them available to communities to use without having to pay a price. It's also just really awkward where they have to just try to estimate what the taxes are on just a portion of their overall building. So if there are any other questions, love to hear it. And I know we're officially out of time. So let me just, Josephine, any other questions?
No, I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
People,
Great.
I'm happy to share your contact information if anyone else has any other questions following this. And
yes,
a couple
please.
announcements for anyone that can stick around.
Okay, yes. So please reach out to me if any of those bills, really piqued your interest. You want to know more, you want to be more involved. Please just pop me an email or give me a call. Love to hear more. And I just want to say thank you to SVCN and Josephine, to you, and to everybody who was here.